It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next panel discussion, which I'd like to say which I'm really excited about, but I've been really excited about all of them, so that's just not fair. Our first guest joining us today, discussing on our panel discussion, cyber critical infrastructure and national disaster resilience. Our first guest is Gill, who's the head of cyber risk consulting and cyber incident management at Marsh Pacific. Gill has over 25 years in the insurance industry with cyber risk management as their expertise. She's also a trusted advisor for insurance claims and cyber incident response management. Gill, unfortunately, I know you probably had your handful at this time, but thank you for joining us. Thank you. Our next guest is Don Bletchly, who's a senior executive from the Department of Transport and Main Roads. Don has over 30 years of experience in senior executive roles in transport, security, and emergency management. And Don is also the lead for disaster management function, providing strategic advice and coordination. Don, thank you for joining us. We have Roanne Monte, who's the CEO and Chief Executive Officer of Armatec Global. Armatec Global is Roanne within Armatec Global is an innovative leader in delivering cyber and physical threat intelligence solutions. She's got over 18 years of technology and product management and platform architecture experience, and her focus is on ethical, human-based focused product delivery and Industry 4.0 technologies. Roanne, thanks for joining us. This very illustrious panel is David Owens, who's the former Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Police Force and Managing Director of Risky Business Consultants. Dave's expertise in crisis management, fiscal responsibility, and project management. He's also recognized for his leadership, innovation, and strategic risk management expertise, and has made significant contributions to emergency management and operational risk management. Dave, a great pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. And moderating our panel today is the Group CEO of Arista Solutions, Dr. Gav Schneider, who's also the President of the ANZ chapter of the ISRM. Gav is the CEO, as I mentioned, of the Arista Solutions Group of companies and is a renowned subject matter expert in human-centric and integrated risk management. Gav is also creator of the resilience approach, integrating risk leadership and high performance for exceptional outcomes. Gav has also got extensive leadership in management and background in business safety, security, and emergency management, working across 16 countries around the globe. And he holds the prestigious title, including Fellow Institute of Risk Management, Governance Institute of Australia, and the Australian Risk Policy Institute. As a certified Chief Risk Officer by the Risk Management Institute of Australasia, Gav has also been named as the Risk Consultant of the Year for 2019 and IFSEC's top global thought leaders for 4 consecutive years, and the 2023 Risk Leader of the Year. Gives great pleasure to welcome Gav on stage to moderate the next session.
First comment is, as per Dave's earlier, I'm not Leanne Close. Leanne was supposed to be moderating the panel, but thanks to Dave's introduction. I'm probably qualified to fill in. I'll do the best I can. Please do use the Slido tool to ask questions, but if you're here in person, because we do have lots of people streaming in, if you are here in person, you can do the old-fashioned thing and just plainly put your hand up, okay? Or if somebody says something very, very, very inflammatory, please don't throw anything, but feel free to stand up because with enthusiasm. So the topic of the security of critical infrastructure, I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with the changes to legislation that rolled out the amended SOCI legislation. One of the other hats I wear, along with Dr. Paul Johnston, is a senior researcher at the Australian Security Research Centre. So we penned in 2022 a SOCI white paper, forward by Hamish Hansford then, who was the head of the Centre for Cyber and Infrastructure Security. We have an amended version of that in 23, so it's free. Feel free to download it. There's some good hints and tips there. As we move on through this, I would really like this to be an informal discussion, much more than a regulated panel. So, I'm conscious of the expertise we've got sitting in front of us, and I want us to capitalize on that. So I'm going to run it slightly differently to the way Leanne did, and we'll see how everybody deals with ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity. I'm kidding. But we do have lots of ground to cover. And I think it's important for us to also maybe just set the scene around how cyber, how critical infrastructure, and what critical infrastructure actually means come together. And I think this is important. If you're not familiar in great depth, I am actually a big fan of the new legislation. I think it's awesome because it's risk-based. It also drives the requirement for the owner and the operator to manage their own risks and attest as opposed to expecting someone else to do it for you. So in my view, this is just good business. If you can't even identify your own risks, mitigate and manage the things that will hurt you, magnify the things that will help you, you probably shouldn't be in business. However, as per the topic of today, there are many wicked problems that come into play. And some of those problems we know are things ranging from the way threat actors perform to limited resources, even some of the simple basics of the way, for example, risk, cyber, physical security, and personnel security, which are the 4 pillars of the SOTI legislation, intersect. And who takes the lead? Does cyber take the lead? Which you would think when you read the legislation, it's a logical place for cyber to take the lead. But then you look at risk-based and all hazards, and you go, actually, what's your biggest risk? What hazards are you facing? So it may actually be a better place for some critical infrastructure providers to be taking, for example, their safety personnel and making them the lead if they're in a fire zone or flood zone. So let's interrogate some of this, discuss some of this. So the first question I'd like to ask the panel is, what are some of the major challenges and major risks that you feel cyber and critical infrastructure, security and risk management are facing right now? And we'll start with yourself if we can, because you're closest and looking at me very, very endearingly. So
Thank you.
Let's go.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Obviously, I'm going to talk more to the cyber side of things, but some of the risks that we're seeing, emerging risks for critical infrastructure particularly, and in the cyber world, are things like the interconnectedness of information technology and systems, the interconnectedness of IT and OT now, and the exposures that can create, emerging technologies such as quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and the way that we have to respond to those and how they can impact on businesses and operations. For us, we're also looking pretty closely at supply chain risk and the challenges that is causing. And we're also looking at, the need for really increased incident response preparedness and understanding what the kinds of credible and capable cyber scenarios could be and how you respond to them. So really from a critical infrastructure perspective, obviously critical infrastructure is so important to our everyday lives and businesses. And so in terms of managing those kind of risks, we really need some structure and some procedure around that. And that's what the SOCI Act has done. So we're seeing these risks are emerging, constantly changing, but we're in a good place to try and manage those risks going forward.
Thanks, Gill. Don, you've been managing transport-related infrastructure challenges for a long time. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Jack, and thanks for changing the rules as we've gone through it. So I've gone through and changed my notes after the presentations this morning because I was quite buzzed by what I heard. And then what you've just done now is change everything that I'm going to talk about again. But how I've interpreted the SOCI changes from my backyard, the work that I've done, critical infrastructure means so many different things to so many different people. It's trying to narrow the definition down so that we can get some reality into the discussion. So I call it crucial infrastructure. So that way I can talk to people and get them to say, well, I've got 1,500 kilometres of road, critical infrastructure, which bit's crucial? Is it the 400-metre bridge over the biggest gorge in the place? Is it the widest floodplain? What do we have to do? So it's working through the nomenclature and the definitions to get people to focus on what would then be the consequences of the loss of that particular facility, so that we can get some strategic insights into what might occur from there. So that'll give me some actionable activities or strategic actions. I know Joe Buffoni, he's looking at this presentation, he's going to talk about strategic insights later on, because he got me into that direction a few weeks ago as well. So from there, and if I go back and look at what's happened in Australia since COVID, one of the things that all people in the emergency management side of the business know that we've been dealing with polycrises. We've had flooding occur, we've lost critical supply chains, we've had closed borders, we've had a whole range of things. Understand the consequences of those so that we can implement the appropriate actions required to redress. So to me, that's how we need to think and work backwards through the system.
Thanks, Don. And that's probably a playbook for how to manage wicked problems right there. So if you weren't taking notes, you probably want to reflect back on that. We'll find Don later. Roanne, you're building technology and you're looking at technology can assist in this. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so first of all, I just want to thank Marsh and RIS2 Solutions for hosting this wonderful event. If I may say, we are very lucky. And the reason for that is, in effect, if you look at the SAKI Act, it is really the policy, the federal policy answer to Industry 4.0, otherwise known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So as we may or may not know, the Fourth Industrial Revolution is already upon us. It involves cyber and physical systems. And it's really, to me, it's a lot to be proud of because it's the only common law country that has such a policy. For me, it's actually an innovative way to think about modern risks in a volatile world. We know there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of, with all of the connectivity and the emerging technologies that are available and coming upon us, how do we deal with that? So in effect, we have on its face, it might seem difficult. Okay, it's more regulation. What do I do with more regulation? There's more things I need to do as a relevant entity as defined by the SAKI Act. But really, when we think about it, it's critical to the generational prosperity of the country. So those are my thoughts on SAKI, and I'm sure Dave has much more insightful thoughts on it than me.
Dave, maybe your view. So for those who don't know, Dave's led some major reviews post serious incidents, hazard events, etc. And so it's not just his law enforcement career or his consulting career, it's actually the insights that he's got from a lot of those reviews. So very curious to see what you think.
Thanks, Gav. I too made the notes, which I'm going to vary. Thank you to ChatGPT. My job is about operationalising policy. So whilst we've dealt with up here, and it's very important, academia is extremely important, there must be a link. I go back to the local levels. So I look at, that's great, you got 37 volumes dusty on a shelf. Do you actually know where your part is? Do you actually know the role that you've got to play? Do you actually know who your counterpart is in another agency? It's about looking at cascading events, and we spoke about it. When you have an earthquake, a tsunami into a nuclear reactor, that was totally foreseeable. But what about cascading events, okay, that are natural, and then you put in urbanisation, then you put on top of that economic inequality, put in social vulnerability, they're your cascading events as you come together. And how do you actually get organisations? We've heard about the bang for the buck. How do you get organisational buy-in for the critical infrastructures as you go through? One of the things I learned from the bushfire report, and I know you're not allowed to tell stories because I'm a storyteller, not a professor.
You can do whatever you want.
Okay, thank you.
Put your clothes on, we're happy.
Guaranteed that. In the bushfire inquiry, we had everybody relying on technology, hazards near me. And I did the inquiry with Mary O'Kane, professor, and she was lovely. And we're sitting together in a community group, and we had one person stand up and say, well, I saw the bushfires coming over the hill. I saw them coming towards me, but I had bushfires near me telling me they weren't here, so I didn't need to evacuate. And I'm pretty down to earth. I went, are you shitting me? And the whole hall just went dead silence. And I went, are you really? And they went, no. the thing is, we can't keep up with the technology that the community relies on. We can't get the inputs in there quick enough. So if fires near me, hazards near me, absolutely fantastic, should have them. But, you know, your eyesight was made before them. So with the technology, we can't get rid of common sense is the biggest thing. And sometimes it's not so common. So I think the biggest thing for me is getting governments, communities, NGOs and private sector actually working together where there isn't these boundaries. And there's a number of government areas that are doing it at the moment in other areas, as in biosecurity, which I think we could learn for a whole heap of issues and problems that come forward where everybody's got the one aim and the outcome to save people's lives and make the community better. And I think if we all work together, we can do that.
Powerful message around collaboration there. I've got some questions coming in, but I'm going to ask a question from my side first. And I'm going to sort of divide it up. I'm going to ask one cyber question and then one generic question. So probably it's the two ladies on the cyber side and the two gents on the general side. So on the cyber side, we keep hearing about these doom and gloom case studies and these hacks and these breaches. And it seems in some cases like we're fighting a losing battle. Have you got a comment or a thought on why we may not be losing the battle and maybe a glass half full perspective of how we can tackle some of these cyber challenges that we're facing and will continue to face based on the virtual nature of how we interact? Roanne, we start with you and then we'll go.
Yeah, so completely obviously the struggle and that wicked problem of in respect to cybersecurity is well documented, right? And on its face, it's doom and gloom. It does sound dystopic and it seems like a losing battle. But what we also have to remember is that we also have the power and the innovation and the smarts to deal with it. So whereas, yes, there are cyber criminals, there's, malicious activity going on a daily basis. There are things we can do. So for instance, practically speaking, from say a relevant entity's point of view as defined by the SOCI Act, there's really fortifying your business value in terms of your IT systems. What does that mean in it's the architecture, it's applying security by design, otherwise known as SPD principles. There's a lot of things that you can harden against what may be coming up. So a person may say, well, what happens? And, Gill brought up an excellent point about quantum computing, right? Once quantum computing, specifically quantum as a service, is readily available, anybody can spin up and create a quantum-based system. And how do we fight against that when existing encryption protocols will be deemed ineffective? Well, there are things we can do architecturally within our systems from a cyber perspective. So think of it like if you have a house and there's only one gate and there's gold bars on the other side, it's easy to get through just that one gate. But if the gold bars are somewhere far away, segmented inside your property, and you have guardrails at each step, even in quantum, yes, it's fast, you can still have some level of protection. And if you put those things in place now, you'll be better off when quantum does come.
Thanks.
I agree completely. I think it's really interesting that these organisations generally have really improved their cyber posture, and that's great news. Obviously, there's constantly emerging threats. There's new types of threat vectors. And one of the things that needs to happen across the board is adaptivity and being able to continually morph the response and how you go about handling those risks and challenges. But what we've seen, certainly with some of our clients, is a real uplift in terms of their cyber maturity, their cyber resilience. And despite not wanting some of the events that have happened in the past 6 months to have happened, it certainly has raised everyone's awareness of cyber risk management and cyber resilience. And I think as a country, and many of our organisations are really moving very well towards increased cyber posture and cyber strength. Certainly the Critical Infrastructure Act is a great step in that direction. I also think some of the industry regulations are fabulous. APRA have excellent prudential regulations. ASIC is looking at this. There's lots of industry regulations. The amendments to the Privacy Act, all these things together are working towards building our national cyber resilience. And that's really what the 2023-2030 ambition is from the government, to really raise the entire cyber resilience of the Australian population and also of business. And I think we're well on the way to doing that. There's a lot more to be done. It's constantly going to change, but I'm really confident that organisations are taking it seriously and handling it very well.
Thanks. And I think that's one of the things we should, while we're focusing on wicked problems, I think the concept that it's usually humans that create the wicked problem, as opposed to architects or designers of systems who can build defences into it, or to your point, by integrating the methodology early and aligning it, compliance can actually lead to strength, not the other way around. I'm going to modify the question from Alex. Thanks, Alex. And I'm going to ask that to Ron and Dave. But Alex's question was, what is the one key takeaway from the protection of critical infrastructure that we can apply to everyday or less critical business? So knowing that both of you have had extensive careers, both operationally, from a command perspective, from a policy perspective, I'm sure that question alone would probably take a few hours if you unpacked it in detail. But I think one of the challenges we've often got is we think about what has to happen at the top end of town. But bearing in mind things are so interconnected, supply chains are a big problem, or an opportunity, depends on how you look at it. Be really interested to know what your thoughts are. Can we start with you, Dave?
Yeah, sure. I think you've got the supply chain is one thing. You've got to look at the interconnectivity across different agencies and different sectors. You can't look at that is what we're going to protect. That's the critical asset. It's okay, in protecting that, what do we need to do? But what affects it? What comes into it? What goes out of it? If you put too much protection around it, what are the consequences there for business? It's also challenging the conventional way that we use to protect things. And I use the word protect. Some things are built in areas that you can't protect. We build telephone lines and telephone towers in areas where we put APZs underneath protection zones and that, but then these unprecedented fires come through and wipe through the poles. You can learn from the highest level what you can implement down lower. It's the cost generally that's associated with it that a lot of companies balk at. But it's not to say because it's happening at a high level that it's not going to affect your business. It'll affect your business at every level. And that's what we've got to look at. And that's why we need to look at government. If you bring in a policy, how will that affect private industry, NGOs and the community? Not just how will it affect governments, and do it for longer than a 4-year cycle. It's good not being in an armed service anymore and emergency service. I can say what I want. And you generally have governments go for 4 years or 4 years, go left, suddenly verge right, because the politics come into it. We're getting away from that a little bit now, but I'm still hearing, the previous government is to blame for that, or the previous. How about we don't blame? How about we actually just say, we got to fix it? I don't care whose fault it is, let's fix it. And they're the lessons learned. The other thing is with the inquiries, I don't know how many inquiries I've done where we make these actions or recommendations, because apparently we're not allowed to use recommendations anymore. First thing I do when I do an inquiry is go back to the 5 inquiries that had happened beforehand and look at all their recommendations and look at how many of them were actioned. And I guarantee you probably 95% of them weren't actioned or are no longer being actioned. And that's what businesses need to look at. We need to learn from the past as we go forward.
Thanks. It reminds me of a paper that I read not long ago. It's an old paper, I think it's about 20 years old, called Lessons We Don't Learn. Don, over to you.
Thanks, Gav. I'll take a slightly different perspective. To me, the SOCI legislation is an elaborate public sector security framework. We deal with dealing with physical infrastructure. What are we doing with it? We're dealing with our IT infrastructure. We're dealing with our governance systems. And we're dealing with our personnel systems. Making certain the right people have got the right coverage to do the things that they do. If I sit down and think through all the particular issues and zero in on one other aspect, it's the human element. And as Dr. David said earlier today, human stupidity that gets us into a lot of these problems. Have we not done the right thing by screening the right people who are on the front counter who have access to the systems that we regard as being crucial or critical? Have we got the right things? Checking them after hours. What databases did they search? Where did they release that information to? When and where were those things activated? If someone's logging on at 2 a.m. in the morning and we're open 9 to 5, why are they logging on at 2 a.m. in the morning? What are the practical things that we put into play to ensure we maintain a high level of security? So when I sit down and look at it, because I also have a responsibility for Queensland government, sorry, I work for those, all right, I'll play in the right space. We're the best in Australia. That's okay. We did win State of Origin this year. We're hopeless at cricket, but you have State of Origin cricket.
This is why we said you can't throw stuff, right?
Look, if we go and look at that, so I have that responsibility as the Chief Security Officer. But I can only give assurance that each of the other areas, as we've mentioned before, the IT side of the business, the accounting side of the business, the auditing for fraud, a whole range of others have also done their job. So we're still trying to work through how we give that assurance sign off, but it's really the collective assurance chiefs need to cross look at one another's work to say, have we got the matrix right? How are we doing the right consequence management within this and looking to how we collectively can give the boss the sign off that says, yeah, we think we're okay.
Thanks, Don. This will be go for the whole panel. So whoever wants to answer first. There's been a lot of talk around collaboration, stakeholder engagement, tearing down silos, or to Lynn's point earlier, the vulnerabilities existing in the silos. From your perspective, and you can tackle it from any which way you feel is right, how would we go about actually doing that in practice? So if we're facing these wicked problems, we've got to get collaboration going. We've got to make sure internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and alignment occurs. How do we make that happen? It's an easy thing to say, probably tough to do. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, look, I think the Commonwealth took a really good step earlier this year, and they ran a whole series of state-based and Commonwealth-connected exercises. Really good exercises, because I ran them. Really good exercises in there was no out-of-bounds territories. So what they were talking about is portable housing. If there was an East Coast event, so if it was Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, and there was a shortage, what would happen? How would you undertake that? If there were resources that are required, because normally when there's fires burning on the East Coast, the West Coast and South Australia can send resources across. What happens when the whole of Australia is burning? Where do you get your resources from and your priorities? And people started asking the questions and saying, we probably wouldn't give you resources. And you know what? That was all right to actually say, okay, as long as we know we're not going to get some resources because we're not relying on past practices, that's what you need to learn from. I think the other thing, elephant in the room that we need to learn from is COVID-19. We have a Commonwealth policy over the top and then states go and do what they want to do anyway. Is that going to happen in a major natural disaster that is catastrophic across a number of states? There's steps being taken and I fully applaud Commonwealth for doing it, but it's an issue that needs to be addressed because they are the big problems where you need the big resources.
Yeah, so for me, from my perspective, really how we need to kind of really be thinking about this is, ironically, we're in a hyper-connected world, right? But in practice, obviously, we all have our own kind of things that we have to worry about in terms of our roles in corporations. But it's really keeping the conversation going and having the fundamental understanding The risks that we face today across all hazard vectors as defined by Saki aren't going to be solved by just ticking the boxes and saying, okay, we've complied now, we're good. I mean, logically speaking, when you think about it, at what point do you really say, right, I've ticked the box, now there's no more risk, right? That just does not exist. So we really have to approach it in terms of these continuous collaboration and having those stakeholders at the highest level really understand the fact that this is compliance is no longer in today's world. Compliance shouldn't be in the back office or middle office, or whether you're in fin services or what sector you're in. It's no longer about just ticking the boxes, right? It's about a continuous conversation and collaboration across all business units and across all stakeholders to really address these risks.
Thanks. Don?
Thanks. I'll deal with it from, say, an emergency management perspective, because in my backyard business, when I first got into emergency management, I came to it via risk, via policy, via communications. I ran the DG's office for main roads, right? And next minute I find myself in the disaster space. So the mantra with us was, yes, we're in the prevention preparedness stage of the business. We do respond, we recover. So fine, very good model to follow, easy way of selling things. I then start looking in terms of other material around the place. From a reporting framework, we use the Owens Sendai framework for risk management, understanding risk, what are we doing in those areas. Look at the IGEM in Victoria, the standard for consequence management, everyone's responsibility, we link, we put things together. Every time I went looking within those, whether I pulled up material from the 1800s or 1700s Prussian generals talking about every plan you have is great, you don't use it the first time it's put into action, as to whether I then go and look at the material from Bob Maguire, who used to run community services in Victoria about dealing with community engagement, what do we do? I then sat down and said, well, how do I see things happening in my backyard? Instead of following a plan, we actually react first of all. Then we might respond. But after we've done some responding, we might sit down and do some reviewing, and that might tell us we'll get some refinement and research happening. Then we might actually do a little bit more adjustment to our plans. Then we might test them. If we're smart, we will have tested them, practiced them, and then reviewed again and adjusted. At the end of the day, the key thing that held everything together was actually the relationships that we had with everybody else. And unless we built the relationships, we could not work towards getting the resilience that we wanted in the system. So I'll give you the 8R model to go with all the others, right? In the sense that, yes, is it collaboration or is it relationships? Well, let's think it's part of the continuum. Yes, collaborate first, we'll then build the relationships. I've done that in the room. I've met Joe Buffoni twice online, I've seen him many times online in national coordination mechanisms. I've spoken to him twice, but I'll follow him and trust him because I know what he's attempting to do from a national perspective is bring it all together so that we're in a better place to respond the next time round.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. I think collaboration in cyber risk management is particularly important, and I'd like to see more discussion take place between government and the private sector. I'd really like to see open discussions about the impacts of some of the legislation and how you can respond to that and how you can do that and remain profitable and continue to comply with some of the fairly hefty compliance regimes that are required. I think that the working group is a great step towards that, and I think Andy Penn, by chairing that working group, will really achieve that, and I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes. I think the other thing is there would be such a benefit if there were increased industry collaborations. I think that the only way to learn from cyber events and cyber risks is really to discuss those with other people who have faced them and dealt with them, and how they've identified them, how they've evaluated, what they've done to protect against them. How they're detecting them, and then what they're doing to respond and recover if they have a cyber incident. Those kind of things, the discussions about that is the best way to really improve the risk management processes. And I'd particularly like to see, those that have suffered a significant cyber attack be really open and frank about what happened, what they did well and what they actually could have done better, because I think that's a fantastic learning curve. Case studies and scenarios and sharing those with people is a great way to improve that resilience.
Thanks. And thank you for all sending the questions through. I'm just having a look. I've got about 6 to do, and we have 5.5 minutes left. So that ain't going to happen.
But it's longer because we started late.
Okay, so we've maybe got 8 to 10 minutes. Let's have a go. If for whatever reason any of the panelists don't answer your question and you have something directed at one of them, feel free to grab them during one of the breaks or the networking drinks afterwards. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover everything, but let's see how well we do. I would say we normally do a flash round and go as quick as we can, but I think that's unrealistic based on the depth of some of the questions I'm looking at. So let's do the first one, and this is probably aimed more at you, Gill, and maybe you, Roanne, from Kath Strods. Thanks, Kath. Any concerns with CI orgs moving to entirely software as a service-based applications and data storage?
CI, critical infrastructure, there's limited space on here.
Okay. Due diligence, MOUs, etc., aren't always prioritized by procurement. Any thoughts on SaaS as a service models and vulnerabilities there? You can answer that in a word or a sentence.
Yeah, so obviously there's vulnerabilities as a result of software as a service offerings by software companies. But I would say that a lot of the reasons why often entities or large, doesn't matter what your size is, well, first of all, if you're hiring a third-party SaaS provider, you have to make sure that they were built by people who know what they're doing, right? Number one. So that is not, when you are choosing as an entity, when you're choosing a third-party software provider, that is not a time to hire a technology generalist. That is the time to find the best experts that you can get, number one. Number two, in terms of implementing an in-house or internal software as a service offering, like say from one of the main cloud service providers, I would say that one of the reasons why there are security vulnerabilities is a lack of understanding of cloud native applications. So you can't, an entity can't just take their in-house on-prem infrastructure and move it to the cloud and expect it to be safe. It doesn't work like that. The cloud offers by default services, technology services that work together to fortify your cloud applications. If you simply move your infrastructure from on-prem to cloud without taking advantage of those tools and services, you're effectively just increasing your digital footprint for attack. So that's my 2 cents. I'm speeding through it because I know Gill must have some other thoughts. So I hope that's helpful.
I think the most important thing is actually whenever you're using any platforms, any services, is really understanding what the cyber risk management procedures that they implement are, and obviously vendor third-party risk management. Supply chain risk is really a big issue at the moment. We're finding that so many of the cyber attacks that are happening aren't happening because of the inability of an organisation to protect their own information systems and networks, but rather those that are provided to them externally by third parties. So my only comment would be you need to really prioritise vendor risk management and supply chain risk management, and make sure that the quality and the standards of the risk management procedures, both embedded in the technology and also from their procedures that they undertake, are equivalent or better than yours.
Thanks. Next question, this will probably be the one that'll take us home because it's quite a big one. Considering future trends in both cyber threats and climate change and other risks, what innovative solutions are being developed to enhance resilience in the next decade? No pressure there, team.
Well, I'll take that question because we're in the cyber and physical converged system space. So that's probably the most plug you're going to get from my company. So it's basically understanding that, in effect, these don't work in silos. And in order to really ascertain if there's a potential threat or an existing threat, you need to have these systems talk to each other. So that's the future. So people think cyber is here, physical is here, supply chain is here. It's an all 360 view, unparalleled visibility to gain adequate or competent situational awareness of your entire organization. My 2 cents and my shameless plug without mentioning my platform.
No need for shame. We chose you because you're an expert.
Okay.
Tom.
All right, I'll take a hard infrastructure line. And look, this is a plug for my organisation. We learned a lot from Hurricane Katrina in the US. That then changed some of the engineering standards and the way we applied things. So going back to 2007, 2008, we were building bridges at higher levels in southeast Queensland. They're on the bay. We thought, based on the information we had, we could get wave heights that would dislodge the platforms. So based on that, we went to a higher level. So we've invested for the future on that. We've learnt from every event. Our bridges we're building on the Bruce Highway, Reed Pacific Highway, that goes from Brisbane to Cairns, right? And links right through to Sydney. Right? We're going to higher standards, right, in terms of building better critical infrastructure over floodplains. When it comes to pavements, we've experimented with what we call bitumen or foam bitumen. It's the way it's put together. I don't know the technicalities as how it's done, but I do know that when it comes out of the water, it actually lasts longer. So you're looking at what you can do to improve your pavements, what you can do to ensure that when it does dry out, we come out quickly. We don't have the disruptions that we would have had previously. So every event we learn something from. So it's getting those Chinese words of wisdom. So it's coming forward, look back, plan for the future. Out of all the information we've got, build the knowledge for the future.
Thanks, Don. Dave?
Yeah, I think with governments actually working with private businesses, actually, if you're running an emergency ops centre at a state level, actually get the private companies in to give you that subject matter expertise. And a lot of governments have shied away from that in the past. It's openly being embraced now. They don't have to be right on the spot. It's their business. They know their business back to front. And the other thing is, a number of government agencies saying, look, we're very good. I'll use the biosecurity space. We're excellent chief veterinary officers and in biosecurity. But I've had it said to me, Dave, we don't yell at the staff like you do in an ops centre. We need you there as an ops commander to teach our people how to do it. So for the first time, a person on the outside is coming back in with that expertise to help government to build that capacity. As I keep saying, we're not the foreigners, we're not the enemy. It's actually saying, I think we've got something to help. Private can help government, and likewise, government can help private. I think that's really important moving forward.
Probably a slightly different answer. I think managing risk in the future and learning from what we've already seen and experienced. I think we need to look at risk in a really holistic way. And in a cyber context, that means not just looking at your cybersecurity risk management. It's talking about things like your threat intelligence. What are the credible scenarios that you could face? Quantifying those out. What's the kind of business interruption loss you could suffer? What's the maximum probable loss? And then you have really valuable metrics and information from which to assess your risk and decide how you deal with it. Likewise, your cybersecurity risk management procedures, your incident response procedures, all those things all add up together. You learn from the experiences and you add those all together holistically to determine exactly what your risk is. And then you're in a really informed position to assess that risk and deal with that risk and decide, do we want to avoid the risk? Do we want to accept the risk? Do we want to mitigate the risk? Do we want to transfer it via insurance? So how you respond to risk doesn't change, but the information that you use to give you the ability to respond to that risk is constantly evolving, and we need to be adaptive to that.
Awesome with that, just the different points of view from the panelists. Thank you. Since we're in the business of shameless plugs, I'm gonna add what we're doing, and it's just something that I think was just missing in some of the discussions, and that's the human element in the piece. We have to continue to build the way humans think, act, and relate. And if we constantly focus on what is the new pavement height, what is the new floodplain, what's the new tech solution, Dave, wonderful to hear that government and private sector are working together better, at least from your perspective. I think that's awesome. I think you've given Joe a great platform for his session later, on two. But one of the challenges we've got is until, I guess, we hit that point of singularity that Julian scared us all with earlier, and AI potentially takes over, up until that point, which may or may not ever occur, but one of the things we need to do is empower the human in the system. And we've got to do that at every level. So part of the challenge we've got, and one of the gifts I've been blessed with, is to have worked in about 17 countries so far, and I've seen lots of things. And we've got a little bit of hubris that comes in first world countries because we've had it good for a long time. And we often have had the benefit of relying on incredibly competent, effective government agencies to deal with problems for us. So now we're going, this doesn't work anymore. We need business to get involved. We need individuals to get involved. But arguably for the last 30 or 40 years, the narrative has been, get out of the way, we'll sort it out for you. So we actually have to go back to basics, build common sense, build trust, educate and empower, but we have to do it in an integrated way. And that itself is not easy to achieve. So difficult, we had to come up with a new concept that we call resilience. But realistically, if you think back to what Lord Toby Harris was talking about, we can't just focus on resilience because resilience means bad stuff has happened. We need to be focusing on how do we stop some of the bad stuff from happening. So to close off, one parting comment from each of our panelists. Let's start with you, Gill, since you started us off.
Okay, so I guess the closing comment I would make is in order to be cyber resilient, it's all about preparation. So if I was going to encourage anyone in the room, it would just be prepare. Really practice how you're going to respond to an incident, how those first 24 to 48 hours really can mean the difference between the financial impact, your business operational impact, your regulatory risk, your third-party liability, and most importantly, your brand and reputation damage. So really go about the preparation and be ready for those events, and hopefully you can respond in a really efficient and effective way.
Thanks, Gill. Don?
I think you read my notes. I had the one about be better prepared for the unexpected again. But look, the last time you want to meet somebody is when it hits the fan. Reach out early and make the connections.
Thanks, Don, and I think you've built a career doing that exceptionally well.
Yes, so just to Gav's point, it's really proactive resilience. You know, resilience is when a risk has already been realized, and that's what we don't want. We want to deal with the proactive approach, which is before an actual event happens. So I just encourage everybody to keep the conversations going, and I'm very excited about the future, actually, although there's AI dystopic, conversations going on. I do think that Australia is actually the most innovative, if I may say so, when it comes to addressing these. Now it's just up to all of us to really be part of it, be part of the solution, be part of these ongoing conversations, and really show the rest of the world that we can lead. We have the capacity to do that. I believe in that. And all we need to do now is keep the collaborations going and then just do it.
Thanks, Roanne. Dave?
It's been said to people and relationships upwards, downwards. Don't build them in time of war or time of emergency. Build them before that so that you know who you can go to. We hear people, check your egos at the door. Check your egos at the door, but actually listen to what other people bring to the table, and don't be scared to say, geez, I actually learned something off them. I'd rather work with them and bring that little bit of expertise in that area in because I'm lacking in that area. I'm like a 5-year-old when I go into businesses and I go, but why? Why do you do that? And they go, because we've always done that. Bingo, thank you, gotcha. Because you've always done it doesn't make it right. Tip it on its head, build the relationships, and then build from the ground up.
Interestingly enough, Dave, there's
5-year-old?
There's some thought that some of the best ways to solve wicked problems are actually to remove the barriers we've grown up with and to think more childlike. So thanks for the segue there. But if you could join me in thanking our panelists.